They had to rely on that audible whistle.
Yeah. Now you say code. How would that work, Bob?
Well, each ward in the city, that code would start off with that digit, like Ward 1, all the boxes that began with 1 would be in Ward 1, and in Ward 6, all the boxes started with a 6. And so you knew from the first digit that in what area or what district in Beverly the fire was in. And if you knew what company you were assigned to, you would know whether you had to respond or whether you didn't. But before that, it was interesting. Before the whistle was only came into being by the telegraph, the invention of the telegraph. Before that, years and years ago, it was someone would run to the church and ring the bell. Someone would go into a shoe factory down Rand School Street where they had steam, and they could sound the alarm on the factory whistle. Then the telephone came in, and you could call the fire station and report a fire, or you could pull a fire alarm box out on the street, which was telegraph, and that went to central headquarters. Then it was retransmitted to the whistle down, the fire whistle.
But the average citizen, Bill, could listen to the whistle and tell which ward the fire was happening, right?
That's right. That's right, Ed. And of course, back in those days, it was a common thing for the insurance companies to put out a calendar at the first of the year, and on the back page, you'd have all the boxes, fire alarm boxes in the city and their location listed, and a lot of people go out of their way to make sure that they had a calendar that had all the fire alarm boxes listed on it. A little side story, my grandfather was on the Board of Aldermen when they signed the contract with the Gamewell Company to install the first fire alarm boxes in town here. And shortly after they were installed, they got a call for a fire down on Lovett Street in one of the big stables that had spread to the house. And during those days, you could break the glass and turn the key and open the door and pull the lever down, and the box would be transmitted throughout the city. But to sound a second alarm, you need a special key to open up a door to get to the telegraph key inside. And there weren't too many of those around, you know, the chief and the engineers. And my grandfather had responded with the hose 2 back in those days, and they were screaming for a second alarm, and well, there wasn't an engineer there with a key. Grandfather says, I just happen to have one. So he had the distinction of sounding the first second alarm over the Gamewell fire alarm system for a fire down there on Lovett Street.
Imagine that. Interesting. John, the whistles also had other duties, did they not? They also announced the no school days and wintertime.
Yeah, and they announced the no school, I think, and they announced that all fire department personnel returned to duty too.
Oh, they had a lot of crazy signals. Boy Scouts,
police call, but
police call, militia call,
and more importantly, if the weather had turned bad, no ball game, no Twilight League ball game at the Coney Athletic Field.
That's right. They used to blow the whistle for that. Yeah.
And that certainly was important back in those 1920s and 30s to know whether to go to Cooney Field or not to go to the game. Now, the whistles themselves, you were telling me, were located sometimes on tops of shoe factory buildings?
That's right.
What would be the reason for that, Bob?
Well, because the availability of the steam, the steam whistle, they had to have a steam to sound the whistle.
Bill?
Well, they had to keep steam up 24 hours a day in order to run the machinery. You couldn't bank the fires and then stoke them up. You had to keep a small fire going because they used the steam to turn the belts on the machines in the shoe shops back in those days. They didn't rely upon the electrical machines to operate shoes.
Now, I'm told there was a whistle on top of the shoe factory down in the corner of Red Tool Street and where the big apartment building is. Bow Street.
Yeah, the Bell Shoe.
Bell
Yeah.
Shoe.
Yeah.
And other locations?
Yeah.
There were before,
Sloan and Lovett factory
Yeah,
had a
had a
whistle
whistle
on it
in.
one time.
Yeah.
and they had moved them around over the years because as times progressed, and they were bringing in electrical machines to operate the shoe machinery, why they wouldn't have to maintain the steam 24 hours a day, so the city would have to relocate the fire whistle.
I see. Now, I must say, John, it probably wasn't the greatest thing to live next door to one of those fire whistles, though, when it would let go. I mean,
No, they made a lot of noise.
yeah, that's for sure. Now, Bob, you mentioned earlier the telegraph key. How did that work? How did that all work now? Was this punched in through to a central fire station? Is that how the key was a key located, let's say, down at Central Station, or did they have them all over different stations?
The fire alarm boxes were operated by a spring, and the spring would turn a tooth wheel, and if the box was 12, there would be one tooth and a space, and then two teeth. And this, as it went by, it would trip the telegraph key, and it go into central as one tooth, and then it would be retransmitted from there to all the various fire stations until the whistles and the bells, and they would strike 1 2 or blow 1 2.
I see. I see. Huh. Well, okay. Time for an interesting story. You were telling me about one time the engines went out going to a fire, and I think it was perhaps down at John Wilson's place down where John lived.
Oh yeah.
And they ran into a little difficulty. I think that was your story, Bob.
We had a bonfire at night at the Parramatta Estate on Conning Street, and in back of this barn was this huge field, and it was bordered by a few houses. And John Wilson lived in one of these houses, and either him or he did it for a friend, but they took this big, huge fishing net and spread it out there in that field to dry. And the night of the fire, one of the fire trucks was going to take a shortcut through that field to to lay a line of hose to the barn that was on fire. And they started going through the field, and the truck kept getting slower and slower and slower, and finally grounded to a halt, and no one could understand what happened. So finally someone got out, and they looked underneath the truck, and there's this fish net wound around the rear wheel so tight that they couldn't turn.
Oh, gee. Some of the good times. John, let's talk about, you're down at the station now. This was back when you just became a fireman. We're talking in the 1940s. Okay, you're at the station, obviously on duty. The alarm comes in. Okay, what's the procedure? What do you guys do?
Well, first thing we do, we try to locate where the hell we're going, and read the tape and locate where we're going, and we respond. We'll respond if it come in from the headquarters alarm. If it came in from the street, we'd report to headquarters that we're going to go to a located fire, and we take off.
I see.
Yeah,
Put our gear on.
yeah, and that's natural. Yeah, that comes up
Yeah,
pretty
and
fast.
put our gear on.
Yeah.
At night, though, at night when we're upstairs, we would have our equipment beside our beds, and in order to get to the apparatus floor, the quickest way, we'd slide a pole, the old fire pole.
I think Bob was making mention of what we called a night hitch. Be a pair of shot boots and a pair of heavy pants. Sometimes they were made out of oilcloth down to the Carter Oil Company down there.
Heavy canvas.
And with heavy-duty suspenders to snap on, and then you'd slide down the pole and get your fire coat and helmet after you read the box, and on the trucks and out the door you went.
Yeah.
And that's a system that hasn't changed even to this day. There's still that pole that the
Yeah,
firemen
they're still using that pole.
go down. Well, on a typical day when let's say there wasn't some action going on, what would you be doing? To be doing a lot of cleaning, polishing?
Well, you get
care of equipment and
you
so
get three types of personnel what they're doing. You got the firefighter, and you got the company officer, and you got the deputy chief. It all depends what
Well,
line
let's take
they're
it
doing.
at the low level.
Low level. Well, he's assigned when he comes on duty. He tells the fellow he's relieved. You know, 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock at night, something like that. And if he's assigned to driving the apparatus, he checks the apparatus, makes sure it's got enough gas in, enough water, and so forth. The equipment's in order. Then he cleans his apparatus. He cleans around the station, and outside the station. You got a lot of standby time. Doing nothing is up to his own.
Did you do what we would call today PR work? I mean, did you have the kids? Would the kids visit from school or this kind of thing?
Occasionally, yeah.
They would. Yeah.
We show them around, the truck and so forth.
Bill?
I think today the situation has changed. Like we were mentioning in our first session, that it was the fellows that were fresh out of the service who were used to drilling all day long, that we more or less carried this into the department where drills were set up. I think one of the first drills sessions that they had was Mel Jones was captain at the beginning of World War II, and he had the CD firemen there, and they used to have 2 or 3 drills every night. I think also, as we mentioned before, the fact that the Navy was using the fog nozzle, foam, Chemox mask, self-contained masks, and so forth, that they were brought back and utilized by the local companies, and the fact that the cities and towns had servicemen who would use this equipment, they could pass their knowledge on down through.
Yep.
And it was a change. It was going from the old school to the new school, and those of us, John, Bob, and myself here, the new school, there were some sly remarks made about these young whippersnappers in here and so forth. But
I come here to fight a fire, not to put. I come here to fight a fire, not to prevent the fire. That's the attitude I found.
But still, they had to, in the long run, though, they had to admit that the new methods were probably better than some of the ways of the old days. Bob, would you say?
Well, I was just thinking, we're talking about when we came on. You know, the same thing happened. You know that phrase, what goes around comes around?
Yeah.
The same thing happened after World War I. The World War I veterans came back, and they were met with the same skepticism and you know, you guys been halfway, you've been to Paris, and now you think you know it all. So it's nothing new.
Every generation.
Sure,
has
every
its,
generation will have to go through that.
transition period.
Yeah.
You can imagine that the old timers who used to run around with the horse-drawn vehicles must have had a time when the steamers came in. They must have taken a bit of adjustment
they had a big adjustment to make.
Yeah. Now let's talk about alarms. Now we hear that this was a first alarm or a second or third alarm. How does that system operate, or what can we say about the various alarms? Bill?
well, first alarm usually meant that you'd have 2 engines and a ladder responding to the call. And if the officer in charge, usually the deputy chief there, saw that they weren't able to hold it, why he would call for more apparatus, a second alarm, a third alarm, and that would mean additional apparatus from within the city and possibly coverage from out of town, covering our stations that had been emptied due to the fire. At one point in time there was a 5-alarm card made up, and I think today now they have a 10-alarm card. Every city and town in Essex County there under the mutual aid setup, it's the responsibility of every chief to send in a Beverly Control, their own 10-alarm running card. In other words, if you go beyond a second or a third alarm, Beverly Control would take over, and they would make sure that the city or town would get the apparatus that was necessary to go to the fire scene, and also to give the city or town coverage, so that they had apparatus in the stations for any subsequent alarms.
I was just thinking, John, if we have 10 alarms in Beverly, we must be drawing fire apparatus from Haverhill and Lawrence and Nashua and New Hampshire.
That's the way it's
Crying aloud.
That's the way it's set up.
Can't they put a fire out with 2 alarms as well as, do they have to have 10 alarms to put a fire out today?
That all depends on the area they're covering. Sometimes they go three engine and 1 ladder company, depending on how thickly populated and what can burn, how much life is involved.
So basically, a fire starts out as 1 alarm. Is that what we're saying?
Not necessarily. In different areas. There might be a thickly settled area in a certain area with a lot of hazards and a lot of life. Then you might go a 3 engine or 1 for a first alarm.
I see.
Some areas, some places. Larger cities probably
Yeah,
have that.
but the alarm is always starts off at the first.
Yes, right. The first
And then
alarm,
progresses. As the fire progresses, the number of alarms progress.
It's a judgmental thing on
It's a judgmental thing on the officer in charge.
To call the
Right.
alarms in. Now, Bob, I'm told that you had, when you were on duty as a deputy fire chief, you had the first 4 alarmer that came in?
Oh, I don't know. I never kept track.
Well, I think it was
I
down,
think-
down the Seabreeze.
It was a fire anyway.
Mackerel Cove
Yeah.
restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Bill, you had the first 5 alarm, I think.
Yeah, that was the Beverly Farms hardware store down there. I remember it well. It was a real foggy morning, and the fellow who was in the car with me kept telling me that can't be a fire down there. This is too early in the morning, about 8:30 in the morning. Fire couldn't get going like that, and it's got to be the fog rolling in down there. And we got down, I think, by Pride's Crossing, and Engine 3 said that they had a working fire, and this fellow says, man, can't. They got to be mistaken. It's got to be that fog. Well, when we rolled from Hale Street on to West Street, we knew downright well that we had something was really rolling there. And after it was all over, we found out that some of the piping, gas piping in the cellar had been damaged, and that was what was, I think it was 1.5 inch or 2-inch gas line going into the cellar, and that was what was feeding the fire.
Wow. I'm going to ask Bob to tell us a good Chief Cressy story in a moment, but John, at the Baptist church fire back in '75, now again, this is what I'm told, was there some kind of a bell ringing thing that kind of mystified the guys a bit?
And I don't remember that.
You don't?
When I was there in charge of the fire operation, I did not hear any. I don't remember it. But maybe the people I left behind for checking hot spots and so forth could have struck the
whatever
with the hose line.
Yeah.
But I like to think maybe the angels come down and they so glad that the people say that they should ring the bell.
Yeah. Well,
That's a good story, isn't it?
yeah. In a way, though, I mean, just saving that steeple as it's preserved today for us to, as we mentioned in the first program, that was the Baptist church, that big steeple, and it's still there today thanks to your fine efforts.
Well, that's why I put all my defenses right on that corner.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys can remember. Do you remember the bells? You guys, were you on duty that day in the back or the rear?
I was in the back.
Back, yeah.
But,
You were there,
I
Bob?
don't.
Yeah, I was there, but I don't remember it.
Maybe my source is not as impeccable as it.
Well, no. You know, when you're at a good-sized fire, there are a lot of things that you miss. You're busy, you're running around, you know, and
Sure.
you do miss certain things.
Now, Mr. May, do you have a good Chief Cressy story to relate to?
Oh, I've got a load of them. Well, he was the first chief that I worked for. And you had to know him. He was a bow-legged, pot-bellied, swore like a pirate, tough as nails, and
Could quote the Bible.
oh, yeah, yes, he could.
Yeah, that's what I say. He could quote
And
the Bible.
with all his vulgarity, he could quote the Bible verse for verse. Well, anyway, after World War II, the Coast Guard developed a life-saving gun, and it was like a shotgun in which they would put a projectile, tie a rope to the projectile, shoot the projectile to a boat that was in distress. Well, the fire service thought they could use that thing. People trapped on top of roofs, they could shoot a line to them. If someone fell through a pond or a lake, they could shoot a line to them. So Chief Cressy got one, and he assembled all the hands out in the backyard of Old Central, and he was going to demonstrate it to them. So he puts the arrow in the barrel, and he ties the rope to it, and he puts the blank cartridge in the breech, and he raises it up, and he pulls the trigger, and kaboom, that line projectile took off in a beautiful arc right over the roof of the Central Fire Station. Seconds later, there was a crash, tinkling of glass. Everyone ran out front to see what the hell happened. And here's this rope stretched across Hale Street, leading right through the picture window to the house across the street on the corner of Atlantic Avenue and Hale Street. Well, Creasy, he let out a few old curses, and he put that thing back in the box, and it was never opened again until after he retired. He wouldn't allow us to even look at it. Another thing, I got to tell you this story. My father told this story so many times. I think it was around about 1938. H.P. Hood built a model dairy up here on Conant Street. It was up to date. Everything was spick and span. The cow barns were the greatest. Why, even the cow barns had an automatic manure scraper in there that you pressed a button, these scoops would come along and bring the cow manure up to a drain where it was flushed down to a big cesspool out back. Well, once, it was in July, a hot summer day, about 1938, the hay barn caught on fire. Well, they made a model dairy out of the place, but they never updated the water supply. So they didn't have nearly enough water to put out this huge bonfire. But Chief Creasy says to my father, "I know there's a pond out back," he says. "Come on, Ed, follow me." With his bandy legs, he starts off through the hayfield. He staggers and he's falling. All of a sudden, he disappeared and he didn't get up. So my father stopped the truck, looked over the front, and there's Creasy, up to his neck in cow manure. He had fallen through the cover of the cesspool. Well, without missing a beat, he climbed out of that cesspool. "Come on, Ed, it's this way. I know where it is. Follow me."
John, did you work for under Chief Cressy?
Just from a distance. When I was down West Street, I knew who he was, that's about all.
Bill, how about yourself?
Yes, I remember the first meeting. My father was out sick, and my mother had sent me up to Central to pick up the check, and I'll never forget, because that was my first time in the Central, I think, and I was used to Engine 2, but Central was the big time, So I went up the side stairs on Hale Street, and every step that you took, it was creak, 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 and all of a sudden, Cressy came out of his office, and of course he used to, "Who's this coming up here?" And so I had to identify myself. "Well, what is it you want?" And I'll come up for my father. "All right, by God, and he'll come in here." And he says, "I guess we can find it." And he says, "Well, now, young feller," he says, "how would you like a pocket full of candy?" Well, ask a little 8 or 9-year-old if he'd like a pocket full of candy. That's great. And he said, "All right, by God, come in here." And he pulled the drawer open, get the candy out. And he says, "Whoops, wrong drawer." And I looked, and there were about 6 or 8 bottles of Caldwell's and Pilgrim's rum in there. So he opened the top drawer, and sure enough, I got a hold of some of the candy. But he was a good old scout. He stuck by his men. He did a lot for his men. And they used to tell one story about him. He was home for supper, and the alarm came in down towards Gloucester Crossing way, and so, like Bob said, he'd be running up the street with those bow legs. And he jumped on the back of Engine 1, and when he went over the railroad tracks at Gloucester Crossing, it was an awful joust, and his right leg, I guess, went down, and his knee hit in the street. And he got there at the fire, and he always had 2 or 3 bandanas for handkerchiefs, and he tied it around his knee, and the fire was put out, and he got back to the station, and he told one of the fellas to go get a pail of hot water and some Creolin and a sponge, and they were telling about how he'd lift it up and just put that in there and clean it out, and then tie the bandana around it. And he wouldn't bother to go to a doctor, didn't believe in a doctor.
Oh, he was tough as nails, like I said.
Those old timers, though, and I say old timers, for when you were younger fellas working for these older men, they were quite a bunch, weren't they?
Oh, yeah.
They all had character.
Yeah, they certainly did.
And some of them were.
we had a chimney fire on a Dane Street church one night. A gang of us corpsmen were there. We went there, put a ladder up on the chimney. One of the corpsmen went up there, was sitting on the chimney, and the flue. There was multiple flues in the big chimney. The flames were coming out. Creasy showed up. He looked up and he goes, who's up there? Who's that up there? Oscar Scholes hollers down, Santa Claus, you fool, who do you think it is? Get that man down here, I want to talk to him. He ain't going to talk to me like that. So Oscar comes up and says, you want to see me, Chief? Oh, Oscar, it's you. Oh. All right, by God, you did a good job. So I says to Oscar when we get back to the station, how come you didn't get chewed out? I thought you were going to take a beating. He says, he don't dare speak to me, he says. He doesn't dare go in a package store in uniform to buy his rum, so he sends me down there to buy it for him. He says,
I didn't work in that fire department. I didn't work in that
he says, he don't dare say anything to me.
Oh, dear. Well, this has been a delightful hour. It's passed all too quickly, and I would be very, very happy if the 3 of you, John Ambrefe and Bob May and Bill McPherson, would join us again for a 3rd session coming up very shortly. And we still have a lot of the good old days to reminisce upon. So we thank you very much for coming on the Times Past this evening, and we shall look forward to having you come back again very, very soon. And I mean that sincerely. Great stories you have to share with us. And ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you've enjoyed this second in a series of programs on Beverly's Times Past based upon the history of the Beverly Fire Department, and we'll look forward to being with you very soon. So for now, this is Ed Joseph saying good night.
I never cared for eyes of blue, but she's got eyes of blue, and that's my weakness now. She's got dimpled cheeks. I never cared for dimpled cheeks, but she's got dimpled cheeks, and that's my weakness now. Oh my, oh me, oh I should be good, I would be good, but she likes Bill and Coo. I never liked Bill and Coo, but she likes Bill and Coo, and that's my weakness now.